When Americans hear about Venezuela on the news, it usually sounds distant, complicated, and honestly easy to ignore. But the truth is, Venezuela is not just another troubled country far away. It is one of the most important unfinished stories in U.S. foreign policy today. And at the center of that story stands one man, Nicolas Maduro. Maduro is not a military general. He did not come to power through a coup. He was a former bus driver, a union leader, and later the political successor of Hugo Chavez. After Chavez died, Maduro inherited a country that depended almost entirely on oil money. When oil prices crashed, when corruption spread, and when mismanagement hollowed out institutions, Venezuela began to collapse from the inside. But Washington's interest in Maduro is not just about economics or democracy. It is about crime, power, and control. According to the United States Department of Justice, Maduro is not simply an authoritarian leader. American prosecutors allege that he was part of what they call a narco-state system, a network where elements of the Venezuelan government allegedly cooperated with drug trafficking organizations to move cocaine through Venezuela toward the United States. These allegations are not recent. As early as 2020, the U.S. formally charged Maduro and several senior Venezuelan officials with narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and weapons-related offenses. The U.S. government went as far as placing a multi-million-dollar reward for information leading to his arrest. Maduro has repeatedly denied all charges, calling them fabricated and politically motivated. Venezuela's government says the accusations are part of a long-term U.S. strategy to remove a government it does not control. So, why does the U.S. insist on pushing this case so aggressively? From Washington's perspective, the argument is simple. If a head of state is actively facilitating drug trafficking that harms American citizens, then that leader becomes a direct national security concern, not just a diplomatic problem. Fentanyl and cocaine deaths in the United States have reached historic levels. Any government accused of enabling those supply chains immediately becomes a priority target for U.S. law enforcement and security agencies. But there is another layer beneath this, and it always comes back to oil. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves. Even today, despite years of collapse, sanctions, and underproduction, those reserves remain untouched potential. For the United States, a Venezuela that is politically aligned and economically functional means stability in global energy markets. A hostile or unstable Venezuela means uncertainty, and uncertainty in oil markets affects gasoline prices, inflation, and domestic politics inside the U.S. That is why Venezuela is never treated like just another human rights case. Now, if Maduro were ever physically taken into U.S. custody, something the U.S. has legally pursued but Venezuela fiercely rejects, the charges he would face are extremely serious. They include narco-terrorism, a rare charge normally reserved for groups that combine drug trafficking with armed violence. They include conspiracy to traffic cocaine into the United States and weapons offenses related to alleged cooperation with foreign armed groups. If convicted, these charges could carry life sentences under U.S. federal law. From America's point of view, prosecuting Maduro would send a global message. No leader is untouchable if the U.S. believes they are threatening its citizens. From the rest of the world's point of view, however, this is where things get dangerous. Many countries worry that arresting or forcibly removing a sitting head of state sets a precedent that powerful nations can act unilaterally outside international institutions. The United Nations has consistently emphasized that sovereignty still matters, even when governments are accused of crimes. Without UN Security Council authorization, Any direct military or enforcement action raises serious legal and ethical questions. This is why reactions around the world are so divided. Some governments quietly support U.S. pressure, seeing Maduro as illegitimate. Others fear that if this model is normalized, no country is safe from external intervention. Inside Venezuela, the consequences are equally complex. Maduro still controls key institutions. The opposition remains fragmented, and ordinary Venezuelans are caught in the middle, suffering from sanctions, inflation, and political paralysis. So what does the U.S. actually gain from all this? In the short term, pressure on Maduro satisfies domestic, political audiences. It shows toughness on drugs, crime, and authoritarianism. In the long term, the U.S. hopes for a Venezuela that is predictable, cooperative, and reintegrated into global oil markets under conditions Washington can influence. But history shows that regime pressure does not always produce stability. Sometimes it creates power vacuums. Sometimes it pushes countries closer to U.S. rivals. And that is why Venezuela matters far beyond Latin America, because this is not just a story about one president. It is a story about how far the United States is willing to go to protect its interests, about how international law bends under geopolitical pressure, and about how oil still quietly shapes global decisions, even in the 21st century. What happens next in Venezuela will not just affect Caracas. It will affect energy markets, diplomatic norms, and the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere. And that is why the world is watching, even if it doesn't fully understand the stakes yet. If you found this analysis useful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more deep, data-driven content, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next.